Would you rather live in peace as Mr. Nobody or go down for all times in a blaze of glory?
Cyberpunk 2077 was without a doubt one of the most heavily marketed and highly anticipated games of this last generation. From a studio that developed one of the best Western RPGs of all time in The Witcher 3, expectations were astronomically high. On a personal note, CD Projekt Red are a game studio that I have always held in high esteem, and my excitement over Cyberpunk 2077 was on par with my excitement for Mass Effect 3 when that came out back in 2020. So for anyone who knows me, that's pretty high. Trying to write this review has been difficult, as it's hard to separate my own expectations on what the game was supposed to achieve with the final product that we received. Here, I want to review the game on face value and look at what the game does offer on release, the good, the bad, and everything in between. To give a little bit of context to this review, I played the PS4 version of the game on the next-gen hardware of the PlayStation 5, and I've put about 85 hours into the game, beating the main story campaign and most of the side content available, bar a few gigs and collectibles. So I feel I've got a good grasp on what the game has to offer. Fair warning, this is going to be a meaty review, so sit back, grab a cup of tea, and let's review Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 is an open-world action RPG set in a grim dystopian future. Drawing heavily from its source material, the game offers a shorter, more condensed main storyline when compared to The Witcher 3, which can be beaten in about 25 hours. Players assume the role of V, a character that, though very much crafted and written for the main story, can be shaped and customized by the player to allow for a good degree of role-playing. This is more like BioWare's Commander Shepard than CD Projekt Red's previous protagonist, Geralt of Rivia. The start of the game offers a deep character customization, with some of the most detailed options seen in a character creator in recent years. Some would say that the level of attention and choices available here almost feel wholly unnecessary, given that you can't actually see your character, except in menu screens and terribly rendered mirrors dotted throughout the world. The level of detail and apparent time and thought put into the character customization seems to contradict CD Projekt Red's choice to have the entire game played from first-person perspective. This, of course, is pure speculation on my part, but it seems to imply that the developers may well have planned to include players' own fully rendered V within cutscenes, but chose to remove this feature due to time constraints or technical difficulties. Well, I thought that the first-person perspective created a more immersive environment, especially when walking around Night City, emphasizing both its scale and verticality, and allowing the player to feel in the thick of the action, especially in some of the cooler set pieces. I felt from a storytelling perspective, it sometimes left players feeling disconnected from some of the more emotional moments and interactions with characters. I would have preferred to see my own V's reactions to these moments rather than just hearing them, and feel that this would have had a more emotional resonance and impact. I would have preferred something similar to Deus Ex Mankind Divided, wherein gameplay moments and exploration are seen from a first-person perspective, allowing for that immersion that they were after, while story cutscenes are rendered fully in third person, allowing players to feel more connected to the character that they have lovingly crafted. Once you have created your look and picked whether to play as either a male or female V, both of which have excellent voice acting, players are then given the choice of 3 backgrounds to choose from: Nomad, Street Kid, and Corpo. This begins the story with a unique prologue mission specific to your background and unlocks several unique dialogue options during the game and some pretty forgettable side missions. but disappointingly, it doesn't have any real impact on the main storyline, other than to add some flavour and insight into certain situations. So there's no real need to overthink these early choices, as they feel pretty inconsequential, apart from creating your own headcanon, that is. For those interested, I chose to play as a female street kid. I really enjoyed creating my own V and was definitely invested in her future and the outcome of her story. Though I think a lot of that had to do with my own internal role playing than it did with the way that CD Projekt Red wrote and developed her character. The story of Cyberpunk 2077 is split into 3 acts. Act 1 acts as an extended prologue where we are introduced to V, Night City, and experience V's life as a mercenary and her friendship with Jackie. I immediately took a liking to the lovable, charismatic Jackie and would have liked this part of the story to be longer and more fleshed out. This would have allowed players to see their relationship and bond develop more naturally, rather than there's been a time skip and they're best buds now that we get. This would have made any subsequent events that take place that much more impactful. Act 2 is where the meat of the story is told. V is in a race against time to uncover the mystery of the relic chip, which houses the consciousness of Johnny Silverhand. She follows leads and starts to make alliances, friendships, and enemies as she fights for her own survival and identity. Players follow multiple story threads and can choose how V will respond to events and the characters that she meets. You can have a degree of influence here, though it's not as deep and far-reaching as The Witcher 3, and the choices made feel much more superficial. There is no bloody baron here, and I kind of miss that. Act 3 is the endgame portion of the story, where events unfold rapidly, hurtling you to the finish line. There are 4 possible endings available, depending on players' choices and the side missions they have completed. I was really satisfied with the ending that I got, and felt that the game did a good job of wrapping up the story and offering a good degree of character resolution that left me fulfilled. I'm intrigued to replay the game now and try out other endings, just to see how much they differ. So the game absolutely has replay value. I think the biggest problem with the main story, though, was the pacing. Act 3 felt entirely too rushed, and Act 2 felt too long and drawn out. I hope any DLC content to come will add to Act 1 or Act 3 to flesh these sections out, especially for some of the factions that you meet. The real strength of Cyberpunk 2077's storytelling, though, lies in its incredibly interesting and well fleshed out cast of characters and your own interactions with them. Panam, Judy, and Johnny were particular standouts for me and offered some of the best character development and most interesting storylines. Panam became like the Garrus to my Shepard. She was my best friend who I could always rely on to have my back. We meet her as part of the main story, but I would absolutely recommend doing her side missions, as these offer some of the best storytelling moments by far. In fact, I would say that is the case for most of the companions that you meet. I really enjoyed seeing Panam come into her own as she struggled with her loyalty to her clan and her need for freedom. Judy also quickly captured the sympathy and the heart of my V. A member of the Moxies, Judy has a tough, take-no-shit exterior, but it's clear that she just wants to be loved and appreciated and has been hurt in the past. I found her story arc really interesting, and her final side mission was especially a highlight for me. I feel that Panam and Judy also offer the best romance options in the game. Other romanceable options are River and Kerry, but these characters are almost entirely missable as you only come across them during side missions. The fact that you can miss them completely is almost unforgivable, and those players that just focus on the main story to the exclusion of everything else will certainly miss out. Let's talk about those controversial scenes, shall we? These, like everything else in the game, play out from a first-person perspective, and honestly speaking, they're a bit cringy and come across as very awkward. Panam's love scene is just weird and trippy and kind of hard to make out, but it doesn't really have any genuine romantic tones to it. Judy's was probably the most well handled and heartfelt of the bunch, but it's still a pretty bad bunch. I think even Geralt had better love scenes in The Witcher 3 than what we get here. Finally, let's talk about Johnny Silverhand and the performance of Keanu Reeves. For those that have played the tabletop RPG, Silverhand is a pretty big name, and I was excited to see how Keanu Reeves brings him to life. And honestly speaking, he's done a great job of capturing the charismatic, bigger-than-life, destructive nature of the famous rocker boy. One of the definite highlights of Cyberpunk 2077 is the developing relationship between V and Silverhand. Their relationship starts out rocky, and Silverhand comes across as a bit of an asshole. As we learn more about Johnny, his background and his regrets through some brilliantly crafted flashback sections of the game, we start to see another side to him, and the two develop a begrudging mutual respect and almost friendship. Though players can actually influence just how close your relationship with Johnny Silverhand is through key mission choices and dialogue options. It's interesting to see how Johnny reacts to scenarios, and he continually chips in with suggestions and warnings to V, a little like the Joker in Batman Arkham Knight. Dare I say, Keanu Reeves' performance is breathtaking?
You're breathtaking!
Well, it's compelling at least. Next, let's talk about the open world and exploration. CD Projekt Red have done a great job of recreating Mike Pondsmith's Night City. It is massive in scope and scale, and players can travel freely across it. This is CD Projekt Red's first truly open world RPG, as The Witcher 3 had several large maps that you could explore, but it wasn't a truly interconnected world. Night City has a day and night cycle, which sadly doesn't seem to have a huge impact on the NPCs and their daily routines. But the city does look especially cool at night when the neon signs give it a very different feel and vibe. One of my favorite areas to explore was definitely Japantown, with its holographic cherry blossom trees and its floating koi fish. Each area of the city feels visually distinct, and the influence of huge corporations can be seen everywhere, with massive billboards and holographic screens trying to sell you every kind of cybernetic upgrade, experience, or vice imaginable. In some ways, the city seems bigger than life, limitless, and the saying, anything goes in Night City, seems to ring true if we look at the advertisements constantly thrust into players' faces. Initially, the city feels overwhelming and incredibly cool, and players are left in awe as they look up at the huge skyscrapers and flying cars above. We're left thinking, did CD Projekt Red really do it? Can I really do anything? Is this what the next generation of open world experiences looks like? It's an exciting opening few hours, but then as you explore the city, its shops, its NPCs and side missions on offer, the cracks start to show, and we realize that Night City and its open world has its limitations. There are many buildings and doors that you can't enter, and shops that seem to sell you some crazy items like toys and brain dances, but then you can't actually do anything with them. The brain dance sequences that we get to experience are really interesting and add a nice detective element to the gameplay, similar to Geralt's Witcher sense. But these sections are very scripted and usually occur as part of the main story or occasional side mission. So for all intents and purposes, much of the items that you can buy in these shops feel pointless, other than as items that can be deconstructed for crafting components. It's a disappointing realization. Even Night City's apparent red light district, Jig Street, is a disappointment. I mean, there are only 4 interactable prostitutes in the entirety of Night City? Really? So in some ways, Night City is open world in that you can travel freely around the city and its outskirts, but a lot of what we see is more window dressing, designed to add atmosphere to our surroundings. There is a surprising lack of mini-games and customization options here. There's no Gwent equivalent, no barbershops where you can customize your hairstyle, colour, or apply and remove tattoos. It's a surprising oversight on CD Projekt Red's part, though admittedly the barber and character customization options in The Witcher 3 were not added until later through DLC content, so that may well happen here. While the size of Cyberpunk 2077's map, horizontally speaking, is not as large and vast as The Witcher 3, CD Projekt Red were clear that they wanted to create the feeling of a dystopian city that is almost suffocating in how densely it is populated and how much there is to do. And when looking at the map and the multitude of icons dotted across it, you certainly feel intimidated. CD Projekt Red's approach to open world design has certainly changed in Cyberpunk 2077 from The Witcher 3. While The Witcher 3 encouraged exploration with the more vague question mark symbols, Cyberpunk 2077 makes it a point to tell you exactly where to go to progress the main story, start a side mission gig, or find a collectible. There is so much side content here that sometimes it feels like you are barely making a dent, and sometimes the side content feels like it's trying to pull you away from the urgency of the main campaign. When the stakes are so high in the main story and time is clearly of the essence, this sometimes leaves the side content feeling out of place, especially the more light-hearted elements. But I suppose with a shorter main storyline, CD Projekt Red had to offer value for money somewhere, and there is certainly plenty to do here, though admittedly not all of it is good or interesting. The best side content can be found in the story-based side missions, which offer some of the most interesting NPC encounters and storylines. These side missions range in tone and level of detail, from short, light-hearted missions involving colourful characters that take cybernetic implants a little too far, to more serious missions that explore concepts like corporate power, political intrigue, police corruption, artificial intelligence, the nature of humanity and faith, to name just a few. These side missions are sometimes better written than the main story campaign and should not be missed. Parts of the side content, though, definitely feel more like busy work or filler and can become repetitive and dull at times. These include police missions to take down dangerous factions, recover intel or weapons. There are also collectible missions like finding strange holographic tarot cards in the world or purchasing cars sold by fixers. Though to be honest, you get some cool cars as you progress the story, and once you've purchased some of the better cars and bikes, you won't feel any need to buy the rest. Finally, there were some missions that nearly made me rage quit on a few occasions. These included the god-awful boxing matches, which had some of the worst balancing and gameplay elements in the entire game, especially if you didn't spec your V into a melee tank build, and the race missions also proved incredibly frustrating, just because of the awful driving mechanics that would often leave you skidding out of control as you struggle to fend off your opponents. This leads me nicely into my next point, traveling around the city. Like most open world games, players have a variety of options for navigating the world. This can be done on foot or through the fast travel system, and the game certainly takes advantage of the PlayStation 5's solid state drive with its shorter load times, which makes this a viable option. However, after speaking to Dante, owners of the game on the PlayStation 4 are subjected to much longer load times, which can be frustrating. The majority of players, though, will travel across the map by car or motorcycle. Unfortunately, the driving mechanics do take a lot of getting used to, and some of the earlier cars definitely feel like they're being driven on black ice as you skid out of control, ramming into oncoming cars and off of bridges. The cars feel like they have no weight to them at all, and some of them are very loud, sounding like they're perpetually stuck in first gear. It's annoying and definitely needs more fine-tuning. The more expensive cars do seem to handle better, but even they have their moments. Navigating around the city is made more difficult by the absence of road markers and the awful minimap, which bizarrely lacks the ability to dynamically scale, allowing you to zoom out when driving. What this results in as you speed down the road is a constant need to hit the brakes or do a U-turn as you miss the turn that whizzes past you. All vehicles can be driven in first person or third person, though personally speaking, first person left me feeling nauseous and disorientated. I found motorcycles much easier to handle and more fun to use, especially as they allowed me to actually see my character, well, from behind at least. Despite the tricky mechanics, thanks to an amazing soundtrack, one of my favourite things to do was to drive around Night City, listening to the different radio stations and just taking it all in. Seriously, the music in this game is amazing. Next, let's dive into the core gameplay systems on offer in Cyberpunk 2077. The level designs and minute-to-minute gameplay is actually a lot of fun and one of the best elements of the game. Players are given plenty of choice in how to approach missions. They can try to talk their way in using charisma and persuasion. They can approach objectives with a purely stealth approach, hacking doors, disabling turrets, cameras and guards, and getting in and out of a level while completing their objective without ever being seen or leaving a trace. For those looking for a more action-packed playstyle, this is also a very viable and fun option if you spec your character just right. From ranged and melee weapons to grenades and cybernetic enhancements, there is so much potential to leave chaos and destruction in your wake. CD Projekt Red have done an excellent job in creating a dynamic leveling and skill progression system that has real depth and accessibility. As players level by completing side missions, the main story, and building their street cred, they unlock two types of points to spend: perk and attribute points. This system has clearly been lifted from the tabletop RPG, and that becomes apparent at the start of the game when trying to get your head around these new systems and how best to spec your character to your preferred playstyle. Initially, it's a little intimidating and a bit unforgiving if you make the wrong choice. Attribute points can be spent into 5 possible character attributes: body, intelligence, reflexes, technical ability, and cool. Understanding each of these attributes is important when you are looking at how best to spec and build your character. I would suggest taking your time if unsure, as once you've spent the point, it cannot be undone or re-spec'd. Something that's frustrating, as not everyone knows early on what playstyle they prefer until after playing a good chunk of the game. Each attribute can be leveled up to a maximum of level 20, and spending points in each attribute will give you access to more high level abilities and perks that you can spend perk points to unlock. Thankfully, perk points once spent can be respec'd by purchasing an item from your local Ripperdoc for the hefty asking price of 100,000 eddies. With regards to combat, this is CD Projekt Red's first-person shooter, and they have done an amazing job. The gunplay is a lot of fun, and there are a variety of weapon types on offer here, providing plenty of flexibility and choice, including pistols, revolvers, shotguns, SMGs, assault rifles, precision rifles, and sniper rifles. And that is just the guns. There are also a wide range of lethal and non-lethal melee weapons available, my favourites being the katana and mantis blades, and of course plenty of grenades for those that like explosions. Players can equip 3 weapon types at all times and can switch between them freely. These weapons are split into 3 types: power weapons, which have the ability to ricochet bullets; smart weapons that can lock onto a target and then all subsequent bullets will track to that enemy, allowing you to shoot enemies around corners or in cover; and then my favourite, tech weapons, which allow you to shoot and see enemies through walls. The weapon and sound team did an incredible job with the feel, design and sound of each weapon, which feels distinct and satisfying to use, especially the precision tech rifle with its charge shot. In my first playthrough, I generally aimed for a stealth approach to most scenarios. But if things went very wrong, I didn't mind because the combat was so much fun and incredibly accessible. I still prefer third-person stealth to first-person, however, and will admit that the stealth takedowns in Cyberpunk 2077 felt weird and janky, with plenty of clipping issues. I would say that the stealth elements in Deus Ex Mankind Divided were much better, but the hacking and gunplay in Cyberpunk 2077 is far superior. Of course, this is an RPG, and as such, there are different levels of rarity for weapons and clothing, ranging from common, uncommon, rare, epic, and legendary items. As you unlock higher rarity gear, this also provides the added ability to apply mods, which can add passive buffs like increased crit damage or increased armor. There are also iconic weapons that can be found as part of the story, which have some cool lore and unique abilities. Players can gain new gear through enemy drops from chests, by purchasing them in shops, or by crafting higher level gear from blueprints. In fact, the crafting system in Cyberpunk 2077 had a lot of potential, and I like the ability to craft higher level gear, especially for weapons and clothing that I found early on that soon became obsolete as I found more powerful gear. However, the systems in place here are very rough around the edges and require a lot of fine-tuning to make crafting a viable option. The economy, for one, is broken. The number and rarity of components required to craft higher level gear is so poorly balanced that it is nearly impossible to gain the required resources without some serious grinding in the open world or finding a workaround to cheat the system. Players will also find themselves constantly dismantling gear, which feels like a lot of busy work given the lack of ability for players to tag, dismantle and craft multiple items at once. These small additions would have made a huge difference. One of the elements that I was most looking forward to in Cyberpunk 2077 was the ability to customize your character through cybernetic enhancements. When we first saw this in CD Projekt Red's 50-minute gameplay demo back in 2018, I was blown away by how cool it looked when Victor upgrades V for the first time. Sadly, this cool cutscene only happened once, and the reality of installing new cybernetic hardware is actually pretty disappointing. Players can visit Ripperdocs around the city and purchase cybernetics. This then takes you to a menu screen where you pick and choose the upgrades you want to install, and that's it. It's so minimal and feels inconsequential, especially as there doesn't seem to be any huge consequences to installing cybernetics into every attribute. There's no cyber psychosis to worry about here. It would have been cool if there were real consequences, like increased aggression or even insanity as you start to lose touch with your humanity. The cybernetics that you do install, bar the mantis blades and gorilla arms, don't really have any huge impact on the look of your character. And that's just a little disappointing, especially when you look at some of the crazy options available in the world's NPCs. I was so disappointed with cybernetics and many of the cooler versions I couldn't install because I didn't have a high enough attribute in that area, or I just didn't have enough money to buy it. It was so disappointing in a Cyberpunk game. I mean, it's in the bloody name. It feels half-baked, like a blueprint of a design rather than a finished product. Like the team that worked on it focused too much on the gameplay systems and coding and not enough on player experience and immersion. It just felt lazy and definitely rushed. Finally, let's talk about the game's performance. As you know, I played the PS4 version of the game on the more powerful hardware of the PlayStation 5, and there were definitely benefits to this. The game enjoyed quicker load times, looked visually beautiful, and the gameplay ran at a smooth 60 frames per second, which stayed pretty stable throughout. This meant that the minute-to-minute combat and gunplay felt smooth and responsive. I know that Dante's experience on the PlayStation 4, however, was much worse, and he did suffer with frame rate drops often, which could make the gunplay and car controls feel janky and difficult. Despite the improved frame rates, I still experienced numerous bugs and glitches, some of which were absolutely hilarious. Hair and clothing would sometimes vanish in menus, loot pickup detection would sometimes not work, and loot would clip into the ground, making it impossible to pick up. Text and subtitles would overlap on the screen, or audio bugs would occur where characters started talking over each other and skipping lines entirely. The AI would sometimes stop working and just start doing weird things. The worst AI, of course, being the Night City police, who felt more like the Terminator than police officers, as they miraculously spawned on your position, as if appearing out of thin air to kill you for daring to commit a crime. They were broken and annoying. Dante, I know, experienced a lot more bugs with AI getting stuck in vehicles, mysterious floating, the list goes on. The biggest issue I faced on the PlayStation 5, though, was the constant game crashes that I had to contend with. These were numerous and often. Commonly, they would happen when the game tried to quick save and were frustrating as hell, pulling me out of the experience and forcing me to replay entire sections again. Thankfully, reloading into the game was quick due to the PlayStation 5's solid-state drive. Sadly, all these bugs and issues meant that I could never fully become immersed in the world and its story, as something weird would always happen to pull me out of the moment. Still, overall, I did enjoy my experience with Cyberpunk 2077. This was mostly thanks to the excellent writing, engaging cast of characters and interesting storyline, coupled with really fun minute-to-minute gameplay, great level design and freedom of choice, and an amazing soundtrack. Despite some of the performance bugs and frustrating game crashes, I would recommend the game on more powerful hardware like the PlayStation 5 and PC, but I cannot in good conscience recommend the game on the base PlayStation 4 and Xbox One due to the instability of the game on last-gen hardware. CD Projekt Red should absolutely not have released the game in the state it is in on these platforms, and the game absolutely needs several patches and updates to fix these issues and add some of the quality of life improvements that it needs. It's hard to score the game due to the mixed feelings I have about it, but I suppose on the PlayStation 5 I would give it a 7 out of 10. This game is not the masterpiece that we were expecting, and it has many issues, but I still thought it was a good game and I enjoyed playing it. I'm looking forward to jumping back in and playing as a male Corpo V for my second playthrough and making different decisions, but I'm certainly going to wait for more updates and improvements from CD Projekt Red and may even wait for the next gen upgrade that is meant to be coming at the end of 2021. So there you have it, guys. There is my full review for Cyberpunk 2077. Like I said, a meaty review, and I do apologize that it's been quite a wait for you guys to get this, but hopefully it was worth the wait. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, remember to support the channel by liking, commenting and subscribing. Anyway, I'll be back again, I'm sure, with more stuff, more content to come, more reviews to come in the year ahead. Hope you guys have a great week. Of course, take care, and as always, happy gaming. Bye guys.